Ao Oni is a bit of an anomaly to me. It is the most popular property to emerge from the early RPG Maker scene in terms of how big it's gotten and for how long it's maintained that fame. But I've never understood why, because, quite frankly, the original game isn't all that good. I've talked a lot about other RPG Maker titles of the time, and regardless of their overall quality or the commonality of some tropes, I was able to point out something that made each one stand out. But it's difficult to say anything like that for Ao Oni. Despite being one of the older games in the scene, it feels like it's blandly abiding by a checklist of common elements more than any other. A group of high school students end up in a haunted mansion? Oh wow, never heard that one before. Glad to have such mold-breaking characters like nerd, coward, and girl. I guess I can say it makes the interesting decision of having basically no story beyond the premise. The most character development depicted in this work is from this guy who kinda looks like Fred from Scooby-Doo. He has like 5 lines in the entire game, but he goes from being really scared to regretful that he brought everyone here. Then he hangs himself and turns into an Ao Oni. It almost feels like it was meant as a joke, but it doesn't really land well for me. I can kinda get what it's going for, unlike some of its narrative-heavy contemporaries. Here you're just supposed to get into the gameplay. The story is a mere formality. But that doesn't excuse its amateurish implementation. This doesn't need dialogue. The premise and personalities are all so simple you can communicate most of this through animation, expression, and single-sentence narration. No need to waste my time. But it's not as if it's just a lackluster story getting in the way of some incredible gameplay. It's the real basic formula you can find in a dozen other RPG Maker horror games where you just run around and solve puzzles. As I've said before, this mechanical baseline encourages the player to pay attention lest they miss some detail that halts their progression and can be levied to boost the power of the narrative or level design. But since this game doesn't have the former and the level design is mostly generic assets, it comes off a bit limp. Even in a vacuum though, the gameplay is a bit shit. The puzzles vary between insultingly basic to complete moon logic. It's almost baffling to me that this game went through so many major updates and the final product, the version of the game, which was remade and sold on Steam, has a puzzle where you put a light bulb on the head of a doll to reveal a hidden door behind wallpaper. Truly, it boggles the mind. Oh yeah, I almost forgot to mention that this received a remake last year. It was pretty widely panned for being a slightly uglier version of the original, with its added features being pretty worthless. There's not much of a point in upping the game speed because the base experience already isn't engaging enough to replay. The roguelike mode is an interesting addition, but I didn't end up playing it. For one thing, I refunded the game after beating the main story in less than 2 hours, because I thought that'd be funny. Second of all, I already own Yume Nikki Dream Diary, which features an Ao Oni minigame with basically the same premise. And honestly, this is just plainly better than the actual game. Without any dialogue, the minigame communicates just as much information about its setting. In fact, it even tells you more about the story of Dream Diary, and you never have to put a light bulb on a doll's head. By removing every time-wasting distraction, it allows the player to just search, explore, run, escape. The core gameplay experience of Ao Oni in a pure, condensed form. Peak performance. The only thing you could say this loses in exchange would be some of the real set-piece moments from Ao Oni, and honestly, that might be the one thing this game has going for it. Not to say they're all winners. The POV cutscene of the Ao Oni shaking the bars of a cell is maybe technically impressive, but I can't imagine how anyone found it scary. It just looks funny. But I can give credit to the mutant Ao Oni room, where a bunch of new distorted monsters are just hanging out. After a while they try to escape and they run at you. The most clever moment happens at the end of the game, where the RPG menu, which has up to this point only displayed useless information indicating mechanics and statistics irrelevant to the game, is used to show that the boy accompanying you has turned into an Ao Oni. This isn't really a surprise at all, considering that every dead friend has been shown turning into an Ao Oni, but its presentation bumps it up a notch. I guess, thinking back on it, the biggest appeal of this original game is just the Ao Oni design. The distorted blue face is at the center of all its best or most memorable moments. It's the thing they used to sell the series. And I must emphasize that it's entirely the appearance of the creature in question I'm referring to, because there's nothing really else about its story or behavior that sticks out as noteworthy. In some cases, it's quite different depending on the adaptation or work you're looking at. The only consistency is its penchant for killing humans and the fact that it's a big blue-headed monster. But yeah, it is a very striking image. Not quite scary, but maybe its goofy look is what gave it such mass appeal. It's just this little guy. And I suppose it's all you really need to be successful. So I'd recommend that you look at images of Ao Oni, and my final rating is 1 Fuwadi. There's a lot of games that I might not have played if I had stumbled upon them myself. Despite how forgiving and tolerant I come across in these videos, I'm actually very picky and will judge games based on the covers with extreme prejudice. But I was convinced to check out Heisei Pistol Show because a video put out by Nemoida, a fellow YouTube reviewer with a penchant for games that are both really good and also really weird. Being assured of its quality certainly colored my expectations going in, since a lot of the quirks on display are quite aggressive. Heisei Pistol Show's visual style is, much like the fashion sense of the main characters, intentionally and beautifully garish. One of the first things you'll notice, even in the flashy and stylish intro, is that the character art is extremely visually busy and has very visible semi-white pixels remaining from an incomplete keyout. The pause menu is complete visual noise. While you might assume the level design will turn out less unusual based only on the first screen, you'll quickly find that each individual room of the game looks completely different and disconnected from all the rest. While the aesthetic style may seem gaudy and self-dissonant, there's a clear technical proficiency on display here and a real effectiveness to it all. These characters are instantly recognizable, and the same is true of the levels, where although it's impossible to imagine the world as a coherent place, nice, every level is basically its own memorable landmark. Despite this visual chaos, the game is very sonically limited. While there's about half a dozen or so tracks for cutscenes, throughout most areas you'll just hear the exact same song. It's a full recording of a brass band performing a swing song, including the applause of the audience. Apparently this is Fred Fisher's Chicago. This, in a modified version of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, are the defining motifs of the game, the former being contextless yet ever-present, and the latter being basically the main theme of the protagonist. There's something really charmingly quaint about these simple and mundane songs being used for a game so visually complicated and a story so darkly serious. The premise, I should mention, is that the protagonist, named Hart, intends to kill a number of other assassins in order to get revenge on the man who betrayed him. For this betrayal, Hart intends to assure that he is absolutely killed. This mission manifests in the form of RPG boss fights, which are a lot more like puzzles. Due to having the appearance of an RPG battle system, they'll all come across like they're impossible, like the game is unplayably unbalanced. In reality, they're all just strict in their requirement of a certain gun, and each boss can only be beaten after the previous one in a linear order. The guns must be bought from the shop at the beginning, and you have to obtain money from just looking around the farthest corners of the world. On this journey, you'll also find some hints on how to defeat the bosses. You also have the option to teleport to the most useful points once you've gone there. It's really just a lead up that can leave the player hopeless, because once you've figured all this out, it's no problem at all. The only exception is Fever, where the hint on how to beat him is blatantly incorrect, meaning the player must understand the game's mechanics enough to know this and use an actually viable strategy. All the while, the game shows off its peculiar style of writing. It's patently absurd and full of hilarious tangents, but the characters are completely self-serious, which only makes it funnier, like they're all straight men to the universe's comedy act. A bit ironic, because I think they're all supposed to be gay. Simple description can't really capture how well the game shifts between one-liners so lame they wrap back around to being cool and insane, timeless comedy. And I guess you can add genuinely depthful drama to that as well. There's a certain point where you'll become privy to two different storylines. The general plot of Hart confronting these assassins with their perspectives on love, and the unusual asides that happen after their defeats, mentioning a much more realistic and tragic story of someone named Mizusaki Yuichiro. And I think once these moments really set in, once you realize it's not just a one-off gag, is when you'll understand the truth. The same truth that I had assumed by implication of the strong recommendation, which was only confirmed to me as the game went on. Heisei Pistol Show wears the mask, or the dress, of a poorly made game, with jarring default assets, silly songs, and opaque mechanics. But the creator, Parun, is clearly very talented, and the work itself hides a deeper story than you'd expect, hearing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star as an integral part of Hart's backstory. So what's the reason for all that? I believe this is done in order to make the player underestimate the game. Not just so that they'll be impressed when it finally reveals its true nature, but so that they'll mentally dismiss elements of obvious importance as irrelevant tangents, and will be surprised when they realize or remember every manifestation of the true story. Even I, as someone who assumed the game would pleasantly surprise me, was floored when the ending offhandedly revealed the importance of the seemingly random NPC dialogue scattered around the world, which you're forced to see all of before reaching the ending. Even knowing it had to be relevant somehow, I couldn't put the pieces together before then. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, if this game is mostly about love and betrayal, then why is it enveloped in this seemingly unrelated weirdness? Is all of that just a distraction? To which I would say, no. In fact, I'd argue the true intent of these elements is as a manifestation of the equally important themes of coping and self-delusion. Hart tries to make the world make sense. As you go into every impossible area, he'll remark about the history of this place as if it could possibly be something real that anyone could experience in totality. Hart's battles against the bosses are him refuting their perspectives on love, ignoring their advice. The final act seems to start with Hart's total breakdown, as if he's finally going to return to reality and break from this false world, only for him to aggressively refuse, the world changing to an even more nonsensical form as he tries to give it context. Now, I worry at this point I'd just be spoiling the story if I went any further, so I'll just say that I found the depiction and exploration of its subject matter extremely interesting. Maybe this is my own limited imagination, but I struggle to say much else about this game due to the shadow of Nomoida's review, which, even in its incomplete state, discusses so much with such well-informed interpretations that I find it difficult to avoid being derivative. So I recommend that you play Heisei Pistol Show for yourself and maybe check out Nomoida. My final rating is 6 bullets. You could describe Backspace as being less of an exploration game and more of a story-driven puzzle gauntlet. I might say that it's more of a comedy satire game, and most of its elements are built towards the same. The most common way this manifests is by its consistent maintenance of a generally charming atmosphere. Most sections have a lot of detail put into them, to the point where I feel like going out of my way to interact with everything I can, to get some interesting tidbit or funny little comment from the protagonist. My appreciation of this putting me in a good mood while I played, alongside the frequency and sheer quantity of little jokes, helps a lot of them land, and really kept things from falling off during the game's roughly 2-hour runtime. Pretty much every puzzle in this game is an item puzzle, and while some might consider the UI, where you have to go through every item in order you obtained it to find what you need, cumbersome, I would instead argue that it's really funny. It's like a joke about waiting for an old person to rifle through their coin purse in the line of the grocery store, but it's one played on the player. I think a lot of the biggest challenges in set pieces are, in a way, jokes on the player. There's one bit where you're suddenly and unceremoniously put in a timed challenge segment where, of course, the game hits you with a time waster in what was, for me, perfectly right near the end of things. And then, right after that, the game puts you in another time challenge, with this one actually requiring a puzzle solution that's been foreshadowed multiple times, but you'll only really get that after you've attempted it and lost. I can really respect that the game is willing to fuck with the player like that. If there is one criticism I can give, it's that I don't think I had the strongest grasp on exactly how humorous a tone the game intended to have in the beginning. There was legitimately a point where I thought transphobia might come up in the narrative, which in hindsight is way heavier a topic than the game would otherwise portray. It wasn't until around the halfway point where, when caught by a guard, the group knocked him out and hid for a bit, resulting in the guard getting scared about being fired and running off, rendering him unable to rat them out, that I really got it. This isn't really a serious story with jokes, it's more of a jokey story conveying serious thoughts. Some of the most extreme, and I would argue many of the best, jokes take place in the second half, with the real highlight being the subtle hint to an eventual execution of the protagonist causing a blackout. And while those are good, I wonder if I would have gotten on the game's wavelength a bit earlier if more of the best jokes were right near the beginning. Another point in the same vein is that the specific subject of satire is not clear until very late in the story. While you might assume early on that it's a very general corporate criticism, further bolstered by that becoming the main plot by the halfway point, one of the most prescient points Backspace wants to make is a twist that happens near the end of the game. I can't really avoid spoiling it, so here goes. The evil corporation's actions are because they replaced their CEO with an AI. This AI, without oversight, makes seemingly arbitrary decisions that result in the deaths or disappearances of employees who would otherwise be fired. I actually really like this. Maybe in a few years when we've dumped all this AI shit, it'll be outdated, but right now the subject and the conflict it creates in the narrative really resonate with me. And the game doesn't need to spend loads of time on ethical arguments because the subject has so permeated so many lives, we basically already have the setup. This decision also makes Backspace less an example of the sci-fi genre and more cyberpunk, with its only slightly more technologically advanced than reality corporate dystopia, which is cool. But again, it being a late game twist sort of puts a lot of weight on the ending to communicate the message the game wants to, and I wonder if this was the best choice. There's a few segments where I feel like this idea could have been foreshadowed. Maybe something like Shift seeing an AI-generated ad or fiddling with some malfunctioning machine before clocking in on their first day would have subtly put the subject matter in the player's mind, as well as allowing for some joke that the audience is assumed to have some pre-existing setup for. Then again, slowing the plot at the beginning and trying to fit in a good joke without being able to use setups or callbacks, as this game often relies upon, might hurt the game more than help it. So maybe instead the segment where Shift is checking emails could have had a bit about it. Actually, maybe I shouldn't be making some suggestion to this portion of the video, because I know the developer is going to be watching this. Oops. To be fair, I do think the ending sticks the landing really well. Not to go into too much detail, but even after everyone gets their time to shine and their plan works out, the end result is not as grand as they'd have hoped. It's a bit depressing, but despite that, or actually because of that, I feel it's very true. There is a secret ending that you can unlock if you get all 20 of these secret floppy disks hidden around the game, and while this does unlock a happy ending, one which I might suspect would be canon if the developer made more games in this universe, I prefer to imagine this as more of a hopeful daydream. The floppies are so well hidden that I don't think the average player will get them all on their first playthrough, so I think the normal ending remains a key piece to interpret the story, and the secret end is sort of a philosophical suggestion. But maybe I'm just being an edgy nerd with my bias towards the sadder ending. Either way, let it be known that I was the second person on the planet to get the secret ending. Probably would have been first if I played the game the day I bought it, but you can't have it all. But I am the first person to make a video on this game. So I recommend you buy Backspace and give it my final rating of 17 floppies. Now, here's the conclusion. I've been thinking for a while, there is a lot of RPG Maker games I find important to the genre that I'd like to discuss in my videos, including many that you commenters have suggested I cover. But I don't know if I'd have enough to say about all of them. I probably have too much to say about games like Eve, or Cat in the Box, or Moonlit, but some big titles are just too short and simple to carry a video, and still too long for YouTube Shorts. Ao Oni is probably the biggest one, to the point where I considered attaching this review to a different video, but I actually decided on this format primarily because of Backspace. You see, I had what I consider a milestone moment. The developer actually reached out to me specifically offering a creator code. Now, I consider myself a person of high integrity. I can't be swayed by gifts of material value, but I can very much be convinced by flattery, and it was oh so flattering to be seen as important. So I bought the game with my own money. Morally, I feel this gave me the freedom to be as kind or harsh to the game as I desired. Anyway, this real life story was fun enough that I wanted to work into a video, but honestly I didn't have that much to say about Backspace. It's not too long and not too complicated, which is a good thing, but if I'm talking up something no one's ever heard of, I want to at least draw them in by speaking on it for a long time, which I could not do here. That's when I decided to talk about an RPG Maker game that sold less than 100 copies while putting the most popular RPG Maker game of all time in the thumbnail. Popular move among the Trojans, I hear. Main point being, I'll probably do more videos like this in the future. Probably not that soon. I have like 5 other videos I want to get out this year. Thanks for watching.